Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and today we are welcoming Samantha Kamman to the podcast. Samantha, how you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for having me.
So we have a lot to talk about today. The issue is persecution, the state of persecution across the globe, particularly when it comes to anti-Christian persecution. So tell us from a 30,000-foot level, what is the current state of persecution?
So, Open Doors US released its latest World Watch List report for the year 2025, and they found that around 380 million Christians, which is about 1 in 7 worldwide, face high levels of persecution and discrimination. So, another report released by Global Christian Relief, which ranks countries a bit differently, which we get into more later, found that in Nigeria alone, between November 2022 and November 2024, nearly 10,000 Nigerian Christians died at the hands of Boko Haram and other extremist groups. So,
Wow.
Open Doors emphasized this conclusion that persecution of Christians, it is on the rise and it is getting worse.
You know, it's really tragic. You hear that number, you hear 10,000 in one country, and you think, oh my goodness, how could this be happening? And we do tend to think of persecution in the worst case scenario, which is death, and that is horrific. But there are also other layers and levels which we could talk about. There's being displaced from your land, there's not being able to get job opportunities. You know, there are other things that happen in this realm of discrimination and persecution against Christians that really add to this issue. But you mentioned that 380 million figure, which is so stunning in that is more than the population of the United States, right? So when you think about the number of people, and as you mentioned, it's rising, it is up from 365 million people just the year before. Why do experts believe that this problem, this persecution problem, is increasing the way that it is?
So, the World Watch List found a common denominator in these countries that saw a rise in anti Christian violence that made the organization rank them higher on the list. So, these countries either have autocratic governments, really weak governments, or there's a civil war going on. So, Yemen, for example, has been facing, which was number 3 on the list, by the way, it's been enduring a civil war since 2015. You've got the Houthi rebels fighting the government, and it's only gotten worse since October 2023. And during this reporting period for the 2025 World Watch List, Christians found themselves detained or unable to meet and worship.
I mean, it's just in living in America for Christians, being able to go to church every week, being able to go on Wednesday nights without any problem, right? I think it's hard for a lot of people to hear these things and to recognize that in 2025, this is a reality across the globe. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the World Watch List because this report comes out every year. It's for decades now. Can you talk a little bit about how this report sort of ranks the countries? You've given a couple of the rankings to us here as we've been talking, and how it helps citizens and government to maybe better understand the scope of this problem.
Yeah, so the report analyzes various things like violence against Christians, their ability to worship, imprisonment. It ranked North Korea as number 1 on the list, which is done for over 20 years now. And just, yeah, like you said, it's an annual report. It's a reminder of what some people have to go through to be a Christian in certain parts of the world. And yet, what was interesting is the report found that there's around like 400,000 Christians in North Korea. Again, one of the worst places to be a Christian, yet they haven't lost faith. They're still continuing to pray and worship despite the fear of execution or imprisonment.
Yeah, and I think that's a little convicting, you know, especially for all of us, you know, when we get frustrated about things in life. Not that smaller things don't matter, but when you are very literally putting your life on the line for what you believe in every single day, if you're found to have a Bible, if you're found to be worshiping in North Korea, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, what is the daily life like there for Christians? Because as you mentioned, North Korea is number 1. So let's talk about the specifics there.
So yeah, if you're found to be a Christian in North Korea, you will be executed, or you'll be sentenced to a prison camp, or you'll be forced to perform hard labor. And many people don't survive that. And Open Doors tries to help Christians in this area, by providing them with food and aid, but that's all done in secret. And it's just a very dangerous situation. The government monitors everything they do, and it's the threat of death just hangs over them.
Yeah, and it's again, it's unimaginable, and it's very hard for us to relate to in the West Now, you also spoke with Jeff King. He's the head of another organization, International Christian Concern. And you recently talked with him about this issue of Syria. And a
Mhm.
lot of people might not realize life is busy. It's one crisis after another in the news. And so a lot of these things are often buried. But what is happening right now when it comes to Christians in Syria?
Yeah, so King and I talked about, because there might be some confusion because many people think of the Assad regime like, oh, well, Christians, that wasn't a very good regime for them, right? But it's not any better for them right now. One of the things he emphasizes that Christians can't trust the Islamic rebels who toppled that regime to protect their rights. It's this group, it's made up of former members of ISIS, Al Qaeda, and King believes they're just trying to rebrand themselves to try and gain the public's trust. They've met with Christian and church leaders and they've assured them, oh, no, we aren't going to harm Christians. But King has said that no, that it's not something that they can put their faith in.
Yeah, I mean, words and actions are very different things. And when you have an entire history with these groups of horrific treatment of Christians and other minority groups, the idea that suddenly is it possible that they may change? Well, sure, that's possible, but the history tells us a different story there. And quite often we've seen this in history, right? Where you are trying to topple a bad regime, a dangerous regime, and bring in somebody else. And who comes in after is sometimes much worse than what you previously had. And that's not being said to excuse what was previously there. It's just the reality of what we have here. I mean, you look at Afghanistan and other countries, right, where we currently see horrific situations on the ground there for Christians as well, because the Taliban have come back into power there in Afghanistan. So there's really a lot here. But what lessons do you believe as American Christians, right? Or maybe Christians in the West more broadly, what lessons can we take away from these reports?
I think these reports really make you realize just how blessed Christians are in Western countries that they can practice their faith freely. And if anything, I think it just shows you how much having God's love and that salvation through Christ is worth it because there are people in parts of the world that are willing to die for it. So, any Christian in the West who's like, oh, I don't feel like going to church, it's like, what are you doing? Like, some people consider that such a privilege. That relationship with God, it's worth it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's convicting, I think, for those reasons, right? That we realize the privileges that we have and the rights and the freedoms that people have fought for. And I think it's another reason why, and there's no comparison between the things we've seen happen in America or in Finland and what is happening in the countries we're talking about today. But persecution often does start somewhere. And when you talk to these experts, they will tell you that. And you look at what's happening with Pavi Razinen, a member of parliament, in Finland, who has been on trial for sharing Bible verses, right? I bring this up because it's important that we also maintain the freedoms that we have been granted and gained in this country. And so for me, these reports often bring me back to that reminder of why it's so important. The First Amendment, freedom, liberty, religious liberty in particular, are so important. I don't know if you want to reflect on that before we go here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It even makes me reflect on my own faith, and I could see how someone in the West, when you hear stories of Christians in North Korea risking their lives, possibly being sentenced to a labor camp, you wonder like, wow, how am I showing my own devotion to God compared to
Yeah.
this person? It's a reminder just also to continue praying for your persecuted brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah, that's a great place for us to close, to make sure that we are praying for the people in these countries. These are not just numbers or statistics. This is very real life. Just like all of us, these are people who are living and breathing, and it's very easy to get lost in those numbers sometimes. The numbers are important, but they tell anecdotal stories of very real people. Samantha, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to the Christian Post and come back next week for another episode of The Inside Story. We'll see you then.